This is Lynn Twyman, founder of Courage Network, and thank you for joining us. We have with us Vickie L. Evans, best-selling author of Know Your Worth and playwright author of A Change Is Gonna Come. Vickie, thank you so much for joining our program.
Lynn, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited about this. I always enjoy and invite the opportunity to share with listeners and other women and folks who have come through and survived all types and manners of life difficulties. So this is a pleasure for me.
We're so thankful to have you with us. Tell us about your memoir and your novel, Know Your Worth.
Know Your Worth, Overcoming the Dragon of Low Self-Esteem. It's a book of revelation. It's a memoir, a celebration. It is a compilation of my life-learned lessons, songs, poetry, and scripture. And I wrote it to empower, to inspire, and to allow women and tell women that they are worth more than the tea in China, more than the gold in Fort Knox. I just wanted to empower women. Being a person who has suffered from low self-esteem, I felt that it was time for me to unravel, unpeel, be transparent, to let women and young women know that even though we've gone through trials and adversities, we survived, and that we have nothing to hold our head down about. We are queens. And so that's the purpose of this book. It ranked high in 3 different categories on the Amazon.com bestseller list, which I am very proud of. And it ranked 5th in emotions, 7th in women's studies, and 7th in gender studies. So this is a powerful book that you can share with your daughter. You can talk to your best friend about it, and you can also discuss it with your mother. So you can talk about this book on various levels because it has topics on teen suicide, abortion, peer pressure, weight, self-esteem, living life without regrets, coming into the middle age. You know, I'm 50 now, so I could talk about that. I think I could talk about being 20 and 30 and 40, and now I'm just entering my 50s, so I can speak on all those levels and what I've experienced at those levels, and that's what the book is about.
That's great, Vickie. And for our listeners, we have an audience who works with survivors of domestic violence. And I understand as well, Vickie, you are also a survivor of domestic violence. Can you tell us why self-esteem is so important as a survivor, why self-esteem is so important as an advocate and for folks that are working with victims and survivors of domestic violence?
Well, Lynn, I am a child product of domestic violence, and I say that because I grew up in a domestic violence home, and you really don't know the effects that domestic violence have on children. Sometimes you carry that stigma into your adulthood, and it does bring layers and layers of low self-esteem. Sometimes because of what you've seen and have experienced, it puts so many mental blockage and emotional scars carry over from your childhood into your adulthood and even into relationships that you get involved with. I was involved with someone who was mentally abusive, and I think that it had a lot to do with what I experienced as a child. And that's one of the reasons that I wrote the book on self-esteem, because I had to go back into my childhood. And I say to people that I unpeeled like an onion, layers and layers of disappointments and hurts and situations that I had to deal with, and some that were beyond my control, living in a domestic violent home. I didn't ask for that. I had no choice in that. And so there were some things I had to deal with from that aspect as well. And then as an adult, I got involved in domestic or mentally abusive relationships because of the things that I had seen as growing up as a child. I tell people that I lived in a community. The name of my town is Sugarland. It's just very ironic that it's called something sweet. But in that community, domestic violence was like a spectator sport. I mean, every weekend there was an incident of domestic violence, and we all sat back and watched and did nothing as if it was a sport. And so those are things that affected me throughout my life. As an adult, I became an advocate.
Well, that's great, Vickie, and I'm so glad that you took a bad part of your childhood and you turned it into something positive to help other women, other young women, know and understand how it is so important to know your worth and to value yourself. And for a lot of professionals in the field, for victims of domestic violence, that is one aspect that we have to deal with, allowing victims and survivors to realize that they are valuable people, because so often their abusers work so hard at stripping and taking away from them any type of self-esteem that they may have. So thank you so much for being a voice and taking your experiences and putting it into word. Now, as previously mentioned, Vickie is also the playwright of a convicting work called A Change Is Gonna Come, which is now in its third year of production and has performed at places like the Lincoln Theater in Washington, D.C. Vickie, tell us more about your play. What is A Change Is Gonna Come all about?
Well, first I want to say A Change Is Gonna Come and Know Your Worth. They're twins to me. They're both my babies, so I enjoy talking about them. And the play itself explores the issues of domestic violence and abuse through the characters of First Lady Lisa Seal and her husband, Pastor James Seal. And setting is in a local church. It dispels the notion that domestic violence and abuse happens to certain classes and groups of people, that it happens to all people, including church folks, professional folks. It's not limited to a certain race. And it also talks about mental abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse. The play encompasses not only physical abuse, but psychological, emotional, sexual, and social. And many times people just focus on the physical, but the abuse first starts with controlling the mind. So we're very proud of A Change Is Gonna Come. We've gotten rave reviews. Our first production in Alexandria, Virginia, sold out. The Lincoln Theater, we had record number crowds. I am so proud of it, and now we're going to the next level.
And you mentioned about dispelling myths and perceptions in terms of domestic violence, abuse, where abuse occurs. And I think one interesting factor about your play is that it involves the church, because often we feel that we should be able to turn to our faith for support. But in fact, in your play, you bring out that domestic violence occurs even in the church and even among some of the most unassuming people, if you will. Is that correct?
Absolutely, because one of the avenues that I always talk about when we talk about domestic violence in the church, first of all, it's a silent killer. It's something that is unheard of as far as society's view. And many of the women are suffering in silence and wearing masks. They look good on the outside, you know. We always talk about church women with their church hats and their church suits, and they look good on the outside, but inside they are in much pain. They're hurting. Behind closed doors, they are being abused. I want to say 1,500 pastors leave the ministry a month because of some kind of moral issue or something that's going on in the church. And so that is an avenue I tap into, not to embarrass the church, but to raise awareness to the issue. When an issue is exposed or confronted, then you can heal and deal with it. And so that's the aspect that I come from. I'm not male bashing or bashing the church, but even the teaching in the church, one of the issues that I always talk about is the submissive role. A lot of times